Hey y'all, Alex from Music Hub here, and today we're going to take a look at a couple of biographies of the legendary composer Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Johannes Chrysostomus Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart, born the 27th of January 1756 in Salzburg, died the 5th of December 1791 in Vienna. A child prodigy in his younger years and a court composer in his late teens and early 20s, Mozart's life was hectic and involved almost from day one, and his relocation to Vienna in 1781 kickstarted a 10-year span of creativity that revolutionized many genres of classical music, including the piano sonata, the clarinet concerto, the piano concerto, the symphony, the requiem, the mass, and of course, the opera. Mozart's operas were wildly successful and brought him the most acclaim as a composer out of any of his pieces. Works such as The Marriage of Figaro and Don Giovanni fused cutting-edge orchestration and melody writing with compelling characters and plots, and the public loved it. Mozart was somewhat financially inept, however, and despite the success of his last opera, The Magic Flute, he was unable to reap its rewards, having passed away from a sudden illness at the young age of 35. Books on Mozart are plentiful, so there are plenty of works that could be discussed here. In the interest of time, both for my project and for this video, I've chosen two to talk about. First of all, we have the 1999 biography by Robert W. Gutman entitled Mozart, A Cultural Biography. Robert William Gutman, born the 11th of September 1925 in Brooklyn, New York, died the 13th of May 2016 in the Bronx. A music student and graduate of New York University, Gutman worked as an art history teacher at the Fashion Institute of Technology, and he applied his multidiscipline focus to his musical writings. His 1968 book, Richard Wagner, The Man, His Mind, and His Music, was a groundbreaking work in how it dealt with Wagner and, more specifically, his faults, his anti-Semitism. Gutman confronted the issue head-on, and by doing so, paved the way for the conflicted perception of Wagner that most music students have today. I have not read this book yet, though it is on my list, but given how much I enjoyed this Mozart book, I have no doubt I'll feel much the same way about that one. Gutman's Mozart biography was written following his retirement from academia, and when you see the depth of Gutman's research and explanations in this book, it's easy to see how this was written by someone who had quite literally nothing else to do. This is Gutman pulling out all the stops and placing Mozart's career in context with Europe as a whole in the late 18th century. In terms of art history, yes, but also in context with its politics and the frequent regime changes at that time in the steadily disintegrating Holy Roman Empire. It's a recipe for a bloated, oversaturated narrative, and to be honest, I would understand if someone read this book and came away scratching their head rather than thoroughly enjoying it. Personally, I thoroughly enjoyed it. This book takes special aim at dispelling some of the mythos surrounding Mozart's life, fleshing out the personality that was displayed crudely, albeit surprisingly accurately, in the film Amadeus. Mozart's father, Leopold, is dismantled and portrayed as a sort of manipulative leech, credited with kickstarting Mozart's career, but blamed for constantly guilt-tripping Mozart into financially supporting the family. The circumstances of Mozart's death are dissected as well, and the stories of Mozart writing his Requiem as a sort of premonition are totally dismissed. Mozart's death was sudden, unexpected, and came on the cusp of achieving the stability he'd always dreamed of. It's tragic, but not quite as Hollywood as the traditional narrative goes. I can also understand people being overwhelmed by Gutman's prose, which is so colorful, I feel like I'm looking through a kaleidoscope while I'm reading it. Constant references to other events and people, sometimes numerous, completely different things in the span of just a single sentence. This book is rich as a triple chocolate cake, but as long as you consume it slowly with some degree of moderation, there is an incredible amount to Love. One of the most in-depth classical music biographies I've ever read, in all honesty, and one of the best, too. The other book I read is a much more recent endeavor, 2020's Mozart, The Reign of Love by Jan Swafford. Jan Johnson Swafford, born the 10th of September 1946 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. A columnist and composer in the Romantic tradition who utilizes traits of blues music and even serialism in his works, Swafford has been a popular author of classical music books ever since his 1992 debut work, The Vintage Guide to Classical Music. Biographies of Ives, Brahms, and Beethoven followed in the subsequent 20 years, and this Mozart book is so far his most recent biography of a prominent composer. Compared to the almost 1,000 pages of Gutman's book, Swafford's tome weighs in at a mere 832. And it's easy to see where the fat has been trimmed in this one. Swafford is considerably less interested in cultural context, preferring instead to stick to the meat of Mozart's career, the music. And bless him for it, but there is one issue to this approach. Swafford is not quite the level of writer that Gutman is. And where Gutman compresses a lot of information into one sentence, Swafford's language can be a bit more superfluous. The biggest problems I have are when he talks about Mozart's operas. Swafford feels the need to describe each of the opera's plots to the readers in depth, as if he was writing that description for one of his slate columns. It wastes the reader's time that could have been better spent listening to or watching a performance of that opera. Swafford does this sort of in-depth description for other Mozart pieces too, but given that symphonies and piano concertos don't have a literal textual plot to summarize, the focus can be placed on actual musical analysis. And this is the strength of Swafford as a writer compared to Gutman. Because he doesn't have his fingers in as many pies, he can spend his time actually dissecting what Mozart is doing on a harmonic or formal level. Some may find these discussions a bit too in-depth, but I think Swafford is very good at explaining theoretical concepts in the way that a layperson could figure out with just maybe a bit of time, which is a refreshing level of accessibility from someone with a compositional background. It could be so easy for these descriptions to get lost in the dense weeds of music theory, and believe me, I know. But Swafford doesn't let that happen, and more power to him. There's an extremely useful appendix that helps even more with this as well. I'd be inclined to recommend Swafford's book a bit more for the person needing an introductory Mozart biography, even if 832 pages is a lot to swallow for an introductory anything. But I do ultimately prefer Gutman's approach, especially when the narrative is about Mozart as a person, as a human being, because the cultural context Gutman provides does ultimately help with understanding the Mozart story and the decisions he made, the things he may have been forced to do as a result of current events. Both books are recommended reads, however, and I think either book is a valid way to dive headfirst into the wild, wild world of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. But yes, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. More reviews are to come. I will be doing the same type of video for Beethoven. I have one book on him left to read before I can start making it, but there will be even more pages to chew on in that one, impressively enough, so be on the lookout. Thank you so much for watching Music Hub, and I will talk to you next time.